briefly give you the background on what we mean by creation care in the world of Episcopalians and worldwide Anglicans as well. Creation care is the short name for the Episcopal covenant to care for creation that was developed over the last decade via resolutions and successive conventions. And on your table, you have an overview of the Episcopal covenant that we take as part of being Episcopalians with regard to care of creation. And you see it stems from our baptismal covenants to follow Jesus. In Jesus, God so loved the whole world. We follow Jesus, so we love the world God loves. Concerned about the global climate emergency drawing from a range of approaches, we commit to form and restore loving, liberating, life-giving relationships with all of creation. You can see that we have loving formation, liberating advocacy, and life-giving conservation. I love this last one particularly. For God's sake, we will adopt practical ways of reducing our climate impact and living more humbly and gently on earth as individuals, households, congregations, institutions, and dioceses. Creation care is one of the three priorities of presiding Bishop Michael Curry. The other two are evangelicalism and reconciliation. And caring for the earth, of course, is as old, at least, a Christian principle as St. Francis, who died in 1226. So it goes a long way back. It has aspects, as we have developed it, that are international, national, and local. International, there is the Anglican Communion Environmental Network. Sorry. Thank you. Please silence your cell phones. That's all right. That's all right. I first learned about the Anglican Communion Environmental Network, which comes out of South Africa, when I was on a mission trip there. Several years ago, South Africa actually literally ran out of water. And that got their attention. And they started a movement called Green Anglicans. And I have a t-shirt that said, I'm a Green Anglican, but Hurricane Ian took it away, which is some irony in that. Nationally, we have produced of course, a task force. We do love task force. And there has been a task force convened many years ago to assist the church in responding to the growing threat of climate change, systemic environmental racism and injustice, biodiversity loss, and localized environmental degradation. And that task force has members, and it keeps being reappointed and doing various things. It produced in 2015 a whole set of materials that are prayers of the people you can use, that are various things for our liturgy that we can use, going back to 2015. And some of these I actually know I've heard here on various occasions. Then there's a monthly newsletter, which is actually quite wonderful, and you can just sign up for it online. March 20th, 2023 was a news event about water problems in Hawaii. Creation care. Monthly newsletter we produce. And there are grants that are given out. In just, a few days ago, the Office of Public Affairs announced a total of $100,000 available for grants to organizations, congregations in the United States for something related to creation care. And then, of course, there are local things going on, even though we don't hear about them that much. One of the last year's grants went to St. James House of Prayer, Episcopal Church, Episcopal Diocese of Southwest Florida. Hope and Faith and Resilience in Marginalized Communities, $15,000, addressing flooding and water quality impacts by strengthening 5 stormwater drainage ponds in East Tampa with natural and sustainable green infrastructure in collaboration with 9 interdenominational congregations and the Hillsborough Organization for Progress and Equality. I had never heard that until I was preparing for this talk. Okay, but it's in our neighborhood. And then how about in our own diocese? Just 4 days from now, I'll bet you did not know this, at Day Spring Episcopal Conference Center, there will be the Creation Care Farm to Table dinner that I wished I had been invited to. In 2024, we welcome Derek Weston and the Reverend Anna Wolfenden, food and faith podcasters and authors of The Just Kitchen, as our discussion leaders and speakers for the evening. The evening includes a 4-course meal under the stars. Well, and it's going to have signature ingredients from Benison Farms and Episcopal Good News Garden, founded by St. Thomas Episcopal Church and St. Augustine's Episcopal Church in St. Petersburg, Florida. Okay, now if you come in April, right here, to this very place, you will come to our presentation on Creation Care Part 2, Sustainable Food, Healthy People, Healthy Earth. And you will learn about what we are doing in this area in terms of sustainable agriculture and healthy food. Right here in the kitchen that produces plastic mac and cheese. Reliable, great. All right, we're going to have that. That's an advertisement for April. And now, with that background, you can see why we are delighted to have with us today 4th generation Florida native, Captain Chris Wittman. I got this off his website. Co-founder of Captains for Clean Water, which he did after witnessing the consequences of Florida's water mismanagement. He has extensive experience as a fishing and hunting guide, is a nationally renowned tournament angler, an on-camera host and TV show reporter. I first heard him at an ECW meeting last year, and I spent 30 years, I hate to admit this, in Washington, D.C., trying to be an advocate for different things, low income, health care, among other things. And after I heard Chris, I said, I have never seen such an effective, nonpartisan, grassroots organization as what has been done here. And I ran right out, went on the website, bought myself membership and a sticker, which is on my 40-year-old car. And with that, we are so delighted to have you, Chris. Chris Wittman.
I can just use it.
All right, yes.
Thank you, Barbara. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me here this afternoon. It's good to be here. It's good to be back. I've had the pleasure of speaking with this group a number of times. So I'm going to quickly kind of give an update of some of the things that's been accomplished. You know, coincidentally, one of the worst pieces of legislation to threaten Everglades restoration that's ever happened was filed a day before I was speaking here, and I literally walked out the doors and got in a plane and went to Tallahassee to work on that, and that was a couple of years ago now. But so this group holds up a lot of significance for this fight. But last week we celebrated the 8th year birthday or anniversary of Captains for Clean Water. I don't know how you would classify that, but 8 years ago we were in a very similar scenario than we are today. And that's kind of a scary thought. Lake Okeechobee today is at 16.33 feet. For this time of year in the dry season, that is like staring down the barrel of a gun. We had very high lake as a result of Hurricane Ian, and then went into an El Nino weather pattern, which means a wet, dry season. And all indications are that we will come into a wetter than usual wet season. So the reason we formed this organization was we saw the impact that water quality had and water management had on our community. You know, many of you know I grew up on Sanibel Island, down off Dixie Beach Boulevard in Gumbo Limbo. I went to Sanibel Elementary School, and we saw those impacts. We saw them as fishing guides firsthand to our water, to our business, to the quality of experiences we could offer. We saw it to the hospitality industry, the hotels, the restaurants. We saw it to quality of life, of why we all choose to live here. We saw health impacts from being exposed to red tide and blue-green algae. We saw all these ways that we are being impacted, and as fishing guides, we looked at ourselves and thought, you know, look, I've born and raised here, grew up on this island. I've got a career that is dependent on the quality of our ecosystems and the quality of our water. And for 16 years into that career at that point, I wasn't involved in trying to fix the issue. It wasn't because I didn't care, it wasn't because I wasn't aware. I just didn't see how an individual like myself could have an impact on such a massive issue. And the reality is, people like me, people like each one of us individually, we're the missing link. For years, there was science on this. Over 200 scientists from around the world have researched Everglades restoration and reconnecting the system of water so it flows back to the Everglades and doesn't get discharged to the east and west coast. There was engineering, the largest ecosystem restoration project ever to be undertaken in the history of the planet is Everglades restoration, the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan, and it's underway right now. And so we were 8 years ago sitting here in the midst of a water crisis, and we started diving into why are we in this scenario? Why are we still being affected by these things that I've witnessed since I was a little kid? And the reality was, there was this plan in place, a bipartisan effort, signed into law the year that I started guiding, in the year 2000. Signed into law by, at the time, Governor Jeb Bush and President Bill Clinton, a bipartisan effort, a partnership between the state of Florida and the federal government to restore the Everglades, the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan. And everybody popped champagne bottles and celebrated. We're finally going to fix this. We're going to save a national treasure. We're going to save Everglades National Park. We're going to help reduce these discharges. We're going to secure the drinking water supply for 10 million Floridians and growing. And 16 years later, we should be at the halfway point in this project. And 68 massive infrastructure projects. 2016, we were sitting there going, okay, so where are we at? At that point in time, not a single one of those 68 projects had been completed. It wasn't a science problem. We had all the science. It wasn't an engineering problem. They had this plan put together. The missing link was individuals like myself, like all of you, creating public pressure, making sure policymakers in Washington, D.C. and Tallahassee understood that water quality has the one greatest, most important impact on our communities, on our way of life, on our health, on our businesses. has the greatest impact of things that we can control. We cannot control what Hurricane Ian did to our community, but we can control how our waters are managed. And what we know is we are resilient. We can bounce back. It will take years for our communities to bounce back from an event like Hurricane Ian. But if we suffer a water crisis on the heels of something like Hurricane Ian, that's the nail in the coffin for many small businesses. It's the nail in the coffin for people who are here to enjoy these resources. And that's when you start to see the businesses that have been here my whole life leave. That's when you start to see the residents that have called this place home for generations begin to leave. And so water quality and water management is extremely critical. And sending that message to policymakers was the missing link. There was very little political will to fund these projects from the state and from the federal government. And so for 16 years, those projects stagnated. That's where Captains for Clean Water came in, was we figured if we could unite people, if we could educate them, and then give them a way to use their voice and empower them to advocate on behalf of themselves, their businesses, their families, their grandchildren, that voice could be powerful enough. We had the belief that if everybody knew about this problem and was sharing it with the people in charge of funding these projects, we would see progress. And so that's what we set out to do. We set out a mechanism to educate people, empower people, and give them an outlet, give them a mechanism to contact policymakers when their voice was needed. And here we are 8 years later as of last week, and of those 68 projects that were basically nothing done halfway through Everglades restoration, today over 55 of those projects have either broken ground, hit a major milestone in their construction, or have been completed. Was at the ribbon cutting for the stormwater treatment area of the kind of heart of Everglades restoration, the EIA reservoir, just 2 weeks ago. And so for the first time in the history of Everglades restoration, there's this massive movement towards solving this problem and a lot of progress being made. That being said, Everglades restoration is under a constant threat. It's under a constant threat of stalling, delaying, lack of funding, spending money on inadequate or ancillary projects. Everglades restoration has to sustain all of these hurdles. And the key to making sure that it has the ability to sustain all these hurdles is making sure that we can continue to grow and scale public engagement around this, public support. What we see is through advocacy and education, it creates public awareness. That public awareness creates engagement in the public, and that creates public pressure. That public pressure is what translates to political will. That's what gets policymakers to say, yes, we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year to restore the largest ecosystem restoration project in the world, and we're going to do it because jobs are dependent on it, communities are dependent on it, drinking water is dependent on it, all of these things. And so we have a big task in front of us as far as our organization. This is not something that we can just kind of take the standard approach year after year after year. I mean, how many people were here in 2016 for that water crisis? Raise their hands. 2018, obviously, even more severe. The reality is, we have a lot of new people coming to our communities who weren't here during those water crises. We have people that have left our community because of those water crises. And we've got to scale the input and the voice of the people to maintain that progress. It cannot flatline. So every time we see progress with Everglades restoration, there is a scaling or counter effort to keep things the way they are, to keep things the same by the industrial sugar industry. And the more successful we see movement there, the more resources they're able to put in to try to maintain the status quo. And the only way we overcome that is to continue to build our voice, continue to build the amount of people that are engaged and involved in this issue. And I'll give you an example of that. The EAA reservoir the Everglades Agricultural Area Reservoir. It's a massive reservoir. It's kind of the heart of all those 68 projects. It's a reservoir that is 16,500 acres, 30-foot high embankment wall. To put that into perspective, you can put the entire island of Manhattan inside of it. It is massive. It, in conjunction with raising the Tamiami Trail and these other projects, will reduce our discharges here by up to 80%. That's significant. That project, even though it's like the greatest ROI of any of those 68 projects, for 16 years sat on the back burner because it was most politically challenging. It wasn't until people got involved and started using their voice that that project actually got pushed through by the outgoing Senate president at the time, Joe Negron. And ever since that day, that was in 2017, ever since that day, that project has had to overcome threats that would jeopardize its existence. One of those being that Senate Bill 2508 that I was here speaking about a couple years ago. But the threats did not end there. Last year, the sugar industry filed a lawsuit against the Army Corps of Engineers to try to stop progress on that reservoir, citing that they should receive all the water that they're entitled to before we would take any of their water away to fill up this reservoir and send it to the Everglades where it's needed. Obviously, there's plenty of water in the system for everybody. They just want this over and above guarantee, even at the expense of everybody else, including the ecosystem. So we filed an amicus brief on behalf of the Army Corps, friend of the court, and the district level judge that the suit was filed in found in favor of the Army Corps. He cited our brief, and that was a huge win for this threat. Since then, the sugar industry has lawyered up heavily. They have over 50 attorneys that they've brought on, some that have worked as general counsel in the White House under different administrations. So they filed an appeal. It's at the appellate level right now. We filed a second brief, and we'll see where that is. But the point of this is, in order for us to see these projects through, they have to overcome all these threats and hurdles. And in order for us to ensure that they have the ability to do that, we've got to scale the outputs and be able to bring more people into this. You know, I was talking to Bill at lunch, and so what's the time frame of these projects, of some relief? And the reality is that if that EAA reservoir doesn't get held up in court, remains funded year after year after year from the state and the federal government, we're looking at 2030 for that reservoir to be completed. That seems like a long way off, but in the reality of it, you know, it seems like yesterday that I started Captains for Clean Water with my buddy Daniel, and here we are 8 years later. And so what we know is it's not going to get done any faster if we don't maintain progress. We know that that's critical to our communities. We just did a year-long economic study on what the impacts of a water quality event are here to Southwest Florida. The study was just in Charlotte, Lee, and Collier County. And it looked at the impact from 2018 water crisis and what it would cost if we had a water crisis like that today. And 2018, I don't know if any of you remember, but we had soup kitchens that were on Sanibel and Fort Myers Beach to provide groceries to people who worked in hotels and restaurants and the hospitality industry because they didn't have any business. Hotels were empty, restaurants were empty, people couldn't feed their families. You had people that ran, small resorts around here that employed 50 to 100 people. They were having to call in their staff and say, look, as much as I don't want to do this, I have to cut your hours down to 1 day a week. So that one water crisis had an impact of 43,000 jobs from one water crisis event. Had an economic impact in the tens of billions of dollars. Real estate values, hospitality industry, tourism industry, fishing, commercial and recreational. So there's all these reasons why we should continue with Everglades restoration. We just have to, that message has to be conveyed year after year after year until its completion. It has to be conveyed to new policymakers who weren't in office, maybe didn't live here, maybe weren't here during these things, or weren't aware of these. We have to continue to educate decision makers on why this is important, why we should see these projects through to completion. And so as an organization, that's really where our focus is today. It's how do we scale what we do? We have a model that's proven, it's very, very effective. In the world of grassroots campaigns and movements, the model that we've created is one of the most effective models in getting people through a funnel of awareness to advocacy to taking an action. And we have an open rate, conversion rate in our emails of over 70%. The average in NGO space is probably closer to 18%. So we have a model that's very effective. Now where we're at is how do we scale that model to keep up with the constant threats to Everglades restoration. And so one of the reasons we've been able to be successful as such a young and small organization is we're very tactical about how we spend donor resources, how we spend our dollars, how we spend our time, where we put our efforts. You do not see us playing whack-a-mole with every single water issue that pops up around the state, even though they're all very important. We remain laser focused on the one that cripples our businesses, that cripples our communities, that sends people to the hospital, that makes you move out of your house because harmful algae blooms in the backyard. We stay laser focused on that. And we make sure that when we initiate campaigns, whether educational or whether it's a call to action to policymakers, we make sure that we do those in a way that we're getting the greatest return or the greatest engagement on those. And one of the ways we do is we do a lot of data analytics. We look at conversion rates, we look at messaging, we do A/B testing on putting out these 5 messages to say this one thing. What's working the best? What are people clinging to and understanding? And then we'll put our resources behind that. So right now we're looking to create a new position or a secondary position of a data and analysis person who can look at the information we're putting out, look at how it's being received and coming back into the organization, and then allow us to scale those efforts. The reality is, we're sitting here today with a lake that's at 16.33 feet. We were in Tallahassee last week meeting with policymakers. We were in Washington, D.C. the week before that meeting with policymakers. We believe that we'll get to where we need to with the funding. The governor's budget had $1 billion in it for water quality issues and Everglades restoration. The House's budget is a little over $800 million, so it's pretty much in line with where we'd like to be. The Senate's budget is only down around $500 million. There's going to be some negotiations there. We're concerned with a few bills. We're concerned with where the Senate's budget is, but we're going to apply some pressure there where it's needed and hopefully get those to where they are. But the reality is, we're on a call with the Army Corps of Engineers on Friday. We're going to be getting discharges. It's not avoidable. The lake's at 16.33 feet. We're going to continue to see these wet weather patterns. And that's bad news for our community. But until water managers have these infrastructure projects at their disposal to give them another option, we face the reality of we could be staring down the barrel of that gun at any point in time. And we've been fortunate that we haven't had a water quality catastrophe since 2019 because of how the lake's been managed differently and whatnot. But the reality is we can't just manage our way around it without this needed infrastructure and Everglades restoration. So we know that when a crisis strikes, is a tremendous opportunity to bring people into this effort. When people are physically affected, financially, their way of life, their homes, their businesses, they're going to get involved. When there's no water crisis and the water's beautiful and things like that, people who are here and experience it, they'll probably stay involved. But a lot of them will get complacent. A A lot of them are worried about getting kids to school or to baseball practice, or what they're going to do. They're worried about dealing with inflation or a pandemic or any other issue that comes across a hurricane. But when a water crisis hits, we have a tremendous input opportunity into this effort. But it becomes like drinking out of a fire hose. And so we're trying to build the infrastructure of our staff right now to be able to drink out of the fire hose, to bring more people into this fight and sustain them and keep them engaged, and so that ultimately, 8 years from now, 6 years from now, we're not in the same boat that we are. Hopefully, when my 2-year-old son Tuck is 10 years old, he's not dealing with the discharges and the events that I dealt with when I was 10 years old. And so that's where we're at. A lot to unpack there, but we're confident that we have a model that is the most effective model for achieving what we need to achieve. We're confident that we have the most strategic and talented team that we could ask for to execute these educational campaigns, these messaging campaigns, all of these things that this movement is built upon. Right now, it's a matter of scaling that and coming over, overcoming the challenges that come with that. Many of the donors, we don't get grants and funding from the state. We need to be able to hold them accountable. We don't want to be up there, well, Mr. Senator, we really, we need this $200,000 grant. And by the way, we're about to light you on fire with a video on social media. We're funded by individuals, and a lot of those individuals, like all of us, were impacted from Hurricane Ian. So we're looking outside of Southwest Florida. We're looking at how do we grow that to expand on some of these staff resources needs to make sure that we're poised as good as we could be when a water crisis hits, to make sure that we take full advantage of being able to bring more people into this fight. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, or I know that was kind of a lot, but I wanted to give a higher level of where, kind of the state of the union, where we're at. Yes, ma'am?
What is a safe water level, water level for Okeechobee?
So what's the safe water level for Okeechobee is the question for this viewing online. That varies. It depends on the time of year, and it depends on the weather pattern. So ideally, if you just had a static lake, you'd want to see it at 14.5 feet. That's not the reality. You got a 730 square mile body of water that has a watershed that goes all the way from Orlando all the way down to the lake. So you see its natural state is to rise and fall. In the dry season, you'd like to see that lake get down below 13 feet, 12 feet above sea level, so that you have capacity in the lake coming into the wet season. But with the current ability of water managers, without the ability to send significant amount of water south, what happens is you could have a very wet, dry season that brings the lake's levels up. And in order not to discharge to the coast, those levels are rising. And then you see an anomaly event like Hurricane Ian that within a 48-hour time period adds 3 feet of water to that watershed. And so to answer that question, ideally in a real world, you'd see it down around 12 feet or 11 feet coming out of the dry season and into the wet season, to where it didn't get above 15 feet at the end of the wet season. But the reality is you can't manage it within those parameters until we get more infrastructure in place. And so at some point, some part of the system loses, whether it's the lake being too high, whether it's the coast getting discharges, whether it's the Everglades being starved of water. The abilities of water managers right now, they're picking winners and losers. And Everglades restoration, its completion gives it the ability to have more winners than losers. But really good question.
This new reservoir, you're talking is 8 years away or so. Is that just another lake? Or what? How does that function?
Good question. So the reservoir is going to be basically another lake. The answer is no. It's a dynamic reservoir. So the intent is that that reservoir takes water in from Lake Okeechobee in the wet season. So instead of discharging to the coast, like we'd be seeing right now, we'd be filling up that reservoir. And then as you get into dry season, you'd be able to run that water out and supply water to the Everglades where it's needed. So I don't know the amount off the top of my head, but it's mandated in law how much water the system must be able to move. And so if that reservoir gets completed and they say, okay, there's a limiting capacity within the filter marsh or within some of it, if we're not moving these 380 million cubic feet a year, something along those lines, they have to come up with more capacity. But no, it's not just a stagnant, fill it up and then it's full. It's made almost like a equalization basin. So it's kind of a buffer to be able to take those discharges instead of the coast.
So, so how's that water filtered that's going to go into the Everglades? Is there some kind of natural filter?
So one of the challenges with our system, and one of the things that Everglades Restoration provides, it's actually two things. It's conveyance and then water quality. It's where we're putting water and when we're putting it, and then it's the quality of that water. How are we cleaning it? Lake Okeechobee is an extremely polluted water body because of historical practices. After a storm event like Hurricane Ian, you see turbidity in that lake and suspended nutrients in that lake up over 200 parts. 8 parts per million is drinking water. And so there is a federal consent decree that you cannot send polluted water into a national park. There's no way to clean 9,000 cubic feet per second when it's rushing down the Caloosahatchee River. It can't be done. The amount of legacy pollution in the lake itself would take 50 to 100 years to remove if it was receiving pure, clean drinking water into the north end. So you've got this legacy pollution issue in the lake, as well as not meeting the total daily maximum loads of phosphorus coming into the lake. So it's kind of like if your bathtub was full of coffee, you could be pouring clean water into it, but how long is it going to take before that water is actually clean? So the best way to clean the water is to push it through those systems south of the lake, not discharging it to the coast. And so the way, to answer your question, the way that water is clean is they create stormwater treatment areas. It's known as an STA. It's a fancy name for a man-made filter marsh. They use these big cells, shallow water, kind of like waist-deep water, and these cells that have different types of aquatic and subaquatic vegetation, that as they run that water through these, the plants take up the nitrogen and phosphorus out of their water and discharge clean water on the bottom end. And so those STAs have been created to clean the runoff from the industrial sugar industry fields. For many years, they would just dump polluted water back into the lake or south into the Everglades, and it was creating high mercury levels. The tribes and the communities that south of the lake depend on for their food, they couldn't eat, the fish. There's warning signs still to this day. If you're pregnant, do not consume fish from these water bodies. It was creating invasive plants to choke out, so plants that would thrive in a high nutrient environment like cattails were starting to choke out the native sawgrass, which was impeding water flow. So they built these filter marshes to clean the sugar industry's runoff, and they're very effective. They work very well.
We have one like that here on the island, don't we?
Similar, yeah, similar to that. But that's the concept, is you use plants to take that up. And the nice thing about that is it also provides great habitat and food for migratory birds and waterfowl and things like that. So it's kind of you wouldn't get it out of a big man-made filtration system, and the scale of what you'd have to build in a filtration system compared to what tens of thousands of acres of those filter marshes can do. It's very effective. And so that's what was just broken ground on, or ribbon cutting on 2 weeks ago, was the filter marsh component of the reservoir. That part of it, that 6,500 acre filter marsh is complete, and they're starting to fill the first of 3 cells. So we're going to see some incremental benefit off of that alone. But the real benefit will come when that reservoir is completed, and that looks like probably around 2030 if we keep the pressure up and if we can keep that funding going. And it's Everglades restoration. If we can keep public pressure up around it, we can keep those funding mechanisms. I mean, it's one of the only things in Washington, D.C. that you see bipartisan support. We sent a letter to Congress asking them to fully fund the Army Corps' request for their budget, and that letter was signed by Matt Gaetz and Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I promise you that's the only piece of paper that the two of them put their names on together. It's something to be said for the dysfunction in Washington, D.C. right now, but it shows that Everglades restoration is strong, but the chink there is people getting complacent or flatlining in the awareness and support. So it's what we're building in. How do we as an organization continue to scale the people that are participating? Yes, sir.
Have you considered running for office?
It's not the first time I've been asked that, and we're in a church, so I'll just say absolutely not. The reality is politics is such a broken machine that one individual thrown into that mix can't have a big impact. You'll be blocked out, you'll be steered if you don't go with the status quo and what leadership wants. I mean, the way it works is you can look at Florida politics and we can tell you right now who the next Senate president's going to be, who the Senate president after that's going to be, the Senate president after that's going to be. It's not the people choosing it. It's Senate leadership endorsing and anointing the next one. And you either come along with their tide or you don't. And so the reality is where I'm most effective or anybody on our team is most effective is doing what we're doing. It's empowering hundreds of thousands of people to get involved and create political pressure. So appreciate that. Yes?
How did you get involved in this?
I was a fishing guy. I grew up on this island. My whole life revolved around the water. And I saw what I loved being damaged and the future of it slipping away, and I got very angry. And one of the things, a trait that you have to be a good fishing guy, is you got to be really stubborn. And so I said, look, we're not going to take this anymore. And if people are making decisions that's not in the best interest of me, my family, my fishery, my community, then we're going to make sure that people are aware of that, and we're going to shine a spotlight on it. And so that's how I got involved.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Will Lake Okeechobee ever be clean, or is it always going to be this cesspool that dumps into these, I've forgotten the term.
Yeah, STA. So will Lake Okeechobee ever be clean, or will it always be a cesspool? The reality is it's going to be a polluted water body for our lifetimes. But the counter to that is yes, I think it can be clean. I think there's no way to get there overnight. It's a marathon. It took 100 years of altering a water system at the turn of the century, and the impacts now that system is facing. It's going to take 100 years to reverse that. We have to put it back into a stage of recovery. And in order to do that, water managers have to be able to hold the lake to where it's not too high, so it doesn't kill off the aquatic vegetation in the lake because it's simply too deep.
And has it done that? Killed off any?
Absolutely, yeah. When we see a high water event, we see vegetation loss. When we see aquatic plant management programs that are spraying invasive plants that are having counter impacts to water quality, it comes back to the point of, water managers are faced with picking winners and losers until we get the ability to send water back where God put it, back into the Everglades. There, we have a compartmentalized broken system, and it's like, okay, do we discharge to the coasts and devastate these communities on the backside of being devastated by a hurricane? Or do we hold the lake high and devastate the lake? Neither one of those are a good option. So Everglades Restoration gives them the ability to send that water south and not hurt the lake and not hurt our coastal communities. Yes?
Captain, what the influence has Chauncey Goss had?
Chauncey Goss has had a tremendous amount of influence. As you know, he's a Sanibel resident. His father, Porter, was one of the architects of the comp plan here on the island that's enabled the island to remain what it is, which is pretty special. We haven't turned it into a Siesta Key. No offense to any from Siesta Key, but when we got into this effort, that reservoir was put up by the Senate President who was leaving office. And it wasn't thought that that bill would pass. We shined a huge spotlight on it. The public got involved, and it did indeed pass because of the public pressure. But then that project had to overcome all those other challenges that I talked about. And at that point in time, the state agency, there's two agencies that are partners on that project. Army Corps of Engineers on the federal side, South Florida Water Management District on the state side. The state agency that was tasked with the land of where we're going to build this project was the South Florida Water Management District. And they sought out willing sellers in the sugar industry to sell some of the land south of the lake to build this project. The governing board at that point in time of the district, who's appointed by the governor, was not really acting on behalf of the Everglades or its constituents. They were doing a lot of favors for the sugar industry. And so I'm not sure how strong the effort to find willing sellers really was. It was like, oh, we put a line on the 4th page of our website and nobody clicked on it, I don't know. What I do know is they came up with an alternative option. And it was, we've got 16,500 acres of state-owned land that the taxpayers own that we're leasing to the sugar industry to grow sugar on. And those leases are going to expire in, I think it was January or February. And so this was in October or November. So 4 months, those leases will expire. We can build a reservoir on that section of land. And that was the plan. That got put into the plan. And with less than 24 hours notice, we got a call that said, hey, they added an agenda item to the docket tomorrow to renew those leases on that land. Which, as anybody knows, what will that do? We don't have to tie it up in court for a decade, incur millions of dollars in buyouts to break those leases, any number of things. But we went and testified and said, look, you shouldn't do this. We don't need to make this decision now. We've got 4 more months to make this decision. Let's not vote on this today. At that point in time, Governor-elect DeSantis was not in office yet. He also weighed in and sent a congressman from the East Coast on his behalf, said, we'd like to review the terms of these leases. Please do not vote on them today. And that board unanimously voted to renew the leases. And so, how does Chauncey Goss fit into this is when we created an awareness piece, comes back to the education awareness, what outputs can the organization put together and put out to educate the public? We shined a spotlight on it. We flew over that piece of land showing that they hadn't started construction early because of this. They hadn't done all these things that they said they were doing. This is why they made this decision. We showed the corruption and bias that was at the board level in that agency. And there was so much public pressure brought around that 24 hours after Governor DeSantis took office, he demanded the resignation of that entire governing board. It has never happened at a water management district ever. And today, the chairman of that board is Chauncey Goss, who's also on the board of Captains for Clean Water. And so that agency is a huge, moving in a huge direction and really has just, it's a different world. It's new life in the world of Everglades Restoration, and Chauncey is quite literally at the tip of it as the chairman of that board. So if you see Chauncey on Island, make sure you thank him because it's a very thankless job. Yes?
So your website is excellent, and I really encourage everyone to check out Captains for Clean Waters, sign up for the newsletter, consider being a member. What other 2 or 3 actions can people here today walk out saying, I can do this to help?
Thank you for that. The big one is get other people, help us bring people into the funnel. Once you get them to us, once you get them to the website, whether you get them a membership for their birthday or Christmas or what, isn't Valentine's Day coming up? Nothing says, I love you. Captains for Clean Water. But seriously, helping bring people into this, helping us scale, whether you can, give $5 or $50,000, whatever it is, we see where our pressure points are, where our shortcomings are, with what our capacity is in the organization, and we have a plan to scale those and overcome those. And so any support, big or small, whether it means getting your neighbors involved or your grandkids or your, whatever, your business partners, you name it, all those things are critical. It's the public pressure component is the missing piece that is filled today, and we just have to grow that. Thank you for that. Yes.
And I will say their membership is very reasonable. If you do become a member, once you're on their mailing list and they have a petition or something they're trying to stop, maybe your one voice wouldn't do anything, but they'll end up with 50,000 signatures on a petition, which they make very easy. They send it to you on your computer. You just click a button and you've voted. And so when they go and they have 50,000 signatures or 70,000 signatures, hopefully people in Tallahassee will pay attention.
Yeah, thank you. And that's what that translates to, what can we do? The tangible thing is, if we can communicate to you, if you're signed up for our newsletter, which is free, if you're a member of the organization, which I think is $30, and you get a sticker to put on your car to help raise awareness, and and a buff that comes in handy to put over your nose if we have a harmful algae. But what that enables us to do is to communicate with you when there's an opportunity, like funding of Everglades restoration, or when there's a threat, like that Senate Bill 2508. And we don't a lot of times know what those are going to be until it's right now. It's kind of like, anybody ever seen the movie Batman? And they like the Batman symbol, and it's like, we need your help right now. That's kind of how that works. We can't predict when a really bad bill is going to be filed at the last minute. We can't predict when, like something that happened at the governing board is going to happen last minute. That's the tactics and strategy that is used against us. And so with 2508, that piece of legislation was filed at 9 o'clock at night on a Friday, and it was going to see a single committee the following Wednesday. So we had 3 business days to mobilize people physically to the Capitol, to put awareness campaigns together and get people to take action virtually. And we did that. What that looks like is we send an email, we send a text, we send smoke signals, every way we can possibly communicate, and says, here's this threat, click here, put in your name, put in your address, and our system will identify who your policymakers are. It'll identify your state reps, your senators, governor, and it will send a pre-drafted email, or you can edit that email yourself, and it'll send that to their inbox. And when that happened with 2508, over the course of 13 days, we reached over 10 million people. We had over 50,000 people that took action. At one point in time, the Senate offices were receiving a phone call from Captains for Clean Water supporters once every 1.5 seconds. Their inbox was inundated with 50,000 emails about this one topic. There wasn't a whole lot getting done. There was 2,300 bills filed that session, and everyone in Tallahassee was talking about a singular bill, 2508. And ultimately, the public pressure resulted in that bill getting amended, and then ultimately that bill getting vetoed by the governor. Yes, ma'am.
I remember when you were first getting established, and somewhere along the line, we heard that as a routine matter, every single Florida legislator is supported financially by the sugar industry. That it wasn't a matter of discussion, it wasn't a matter of persuasion, it was automatic. And that I found was one of the most moving and motivating events that I've ever noticed, because it said you're up against an automatic donation to every Florida local legislator. There's nothing but a huge public outcry, and it's going to make a difference.
That's right.
Is it still true?
Yeah, unfortunately, the sugar industry, depending on the year, is one of the top 2 political donors in the state of Florida. It bounces between the sugar industry and NextEra Energy, FPL, depending on the year. One of them is one and one of them is number 2. And the mindset there is, support campaigns. It's pretty easy to support a freshman House rep campaign for a couple $1,000s and then cultivate them through their political career, so that by the time they're Speaker of the House, you can say it's time to come collect. Remember all those favors I did for you. So that's the program. There's been a few people who have kind of gone against that current. To your point of would I run for office, we had a pledge, the Now or Never Blades pledge that people were signing, and a couple of policymakers. We had a policymaker here in Southwest Florida, Heather Fitzenhagen. She was a House rep. Her daughter caught her first tarpon with me fishing. She signed that pledge, and within about a year and a half, she was taken out by they put up a candidate against her. They put a ton of money against her, and made sure that they had the numbers they needed to win that race. And so that's the game that they play in Tallahassee. They bring people in, they spread it across both sides of the aisle, and same thing in DC. When we're coming in on election year, to show you how they operate. When Donald Trump was running against Hillary Clinton, the Van Hoels, your 2 brothers who own Florida Crystals, one of the biggest shareholders in sugar, they had back-to-back fundraiser dinners, $1 million fundraiser dinners. One night it was for one brother was hosting a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton, and the next night the other brother was hosting a fundraiser for Donald Trump. It didn't matter. They floated it all around. So we can't compete with, an industry that gets, benefits $600 million a year in subsidies and taxpayer subsidies, that has an army of lobbyists in Tallahassee and an army of lobbyists in DC that are handing out campaign checks. What we have is, it's right versus wrong. It's David versus Goliath. And the power is in individual people uniting together and being a very, very loud voice. And so that's the approach we take. Thank you so much. And I always appreciate the opportunity to come speak to your group. And I'd love any excuse to get out of the office and back out to my home stomping grounds on the island. I'm going to drive by my old house on the way off the island and take a look at it. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much. I always look forward to coming here.